He's demanding that the world worships him for 3.5 years. Now, why is the chronology of this 3.5 years so essential? It's essential because if you believe in a literal 7-year tribulation period, which I do, right before the Antichrist is revealed, and right before the false prophet demands that the world begins to worship the Antichrist as God, the Church of Jesus Christ is removed from planet Earth in an event which is called the rapture, and God removes the church from the earth before a literal 7-year period called the time of Jacob's trouble, or the rapture. And the Antichrist cannot reveal himself as the Antichrist as long as the church is here. Why? And this is so important. When we discuss spiritual warfare and all kinds of things, the reason that the Antichrist cannot reveal himself until after the rapture of the church is because when we read Thessalonians, we read that inside the church is the Holy Spirit. So inside your life, if you're a true Bible-believing Christian, if you're part of the remnant, that means you really love Jesus Christ. You're not just saying you're a Christian. You're passionately in love with Jesus Christ. You're part of the remnant. And the remnant, which is the true church, gets removed from the earth before the Antichrist is revealed. So how does that happen? Well, it happens because the remnant, or the believing church, is filled with the Holy Spirit. Now, the Bible teaches us that the believing church is filled with the Holy Spirit, and that because the believing church is filled with the Holy Spirit, that there's a great restraining force against evil, so that evil cannot come into fruition or flourish as long as the church is here. And so the very existence of God's church restrains evil because the Holy Spirit is alive and well inside the church, and the restrainer, which is the Holy Spirit inside the church, keeps the powers of darkness at bay. So the restrainer restrains the powers of evil. In other words, the Antichrist cannot be manifest as long as the restrainer is here. Now, let me give you an historical example. In Nazi Germany, there are amazing parallels between what's happening in Nazi Germany and what's happening in Europe and Great Britain and in the United States. One is the Weimar Republic was having hyperinflation. The United States of America is having hyperinflation. The dollar was worth about 50 cents more about 3 years ago than it was worth now. When you go in America to fill up your car with gas, it's not that gas has gone so expensive or food has gotten so expensive. It's your dollar has become worth less and less. That's inflation. The reason inflation occurs, and please track with me, is because the American economic system, as well as the European and British economic system, is controlled by what they used to call in Europe the central bank. Now, the Rothschilds and others controlled the central bank. And Rothschild said, you know, if you give me the money, I'll control a nation. Now, the central bank controls the politics, the elected representatives. It controls every aspect of European and the society in Great Britain. But when the central bank is tight for money, it does what central banks always do, and they certainly did it in Great Britain. The central bank begins to print money from nothing. And therefore you have currency flooding the economic system on some kind of printing press based on nothing. Not based on gold, not based on silver. If you read a dollar bill, it says, this is a Federal Reserve note, which basically means it's backed up by hot air. And so governments have notoriously gotten themselves out of trouble by printing money based on nothing to pay off their debts and inflating the economy. Because when you're pouring trillions of dollars of worthless money into an economic system, you are on the short term solving your debt problem, but in the long term you're flooding the economic system with dollars or marks or pounds or whatever that aren't worth anything. And that's called inflation. Now, sooner or later, inflation is a force that hits the wall and the entire thing falls apart like Humpty Dumpty. How did that poem with Humpty Dumpty go? I can't remember because it was in my childhood. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horsemen and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Well, the central banks and the Federal Reserve are like Humpty Dumpty. You can't print money from nothing and have a sustainable economy. So what happens is that there's an economic collapse. Now, that happened in Germany. It paved the way for Adolf Hitler and a dictatorial regime. Now, China is so furious with Great Britain, and China is so furious with the United States of America, that it has literally demanded that the U.S. stop printing money from nothing, get our financial house in order, so that we can print money based on something and have an economic recovery. That's why so many corporations, so many wealthy individuals, so many people in the middle class, both in the United States and both in Europe, are fleeing the dollar and parking their investments in precious metals such as silver and gold, which have value. And that's a whole nother subject. And I'm not saying, you should just blanketly throw all your money in gold, although I think I'm not a financial planner, so that's the disclaimer. But I do think you should keep some of your money in gold. But remember this, trusting in gold is not going to solve all your problems. In the back of the dollar bill in America, because America was built to one degree or another as a Judeo-Christian nation, it said the word "in God we trust." And you see, as long as America trusted God as its source, God prospered America, and God's blessing was upon America. When America turned its back on God and became involved in immorality and idols, then America's demise began. So the root, please track with me. The root spiritual issue is not trusting in gold. The root spiritual issue here is trusting in the personal living God of the universe, because God is our source and God has promised to take care of us. That's a key principle. Our early founding fathers, and I really pray that the Holy Spirit would open your eyes as I'm sharing this to you, prior to the American Revolution, before the Great Awakening, which was a mighty spiritual awakening. It was called the First Great Awakening, occurred. America imperfectly trusted in God. the Pilgrims and the Puritans trusted in God. So when the American settlers and the American founding fathers found themselves in times of economic chaos, they did not go to the Federal Reserve asking them to print money from nothing. They trusted God. They sought the Lord. They asked for God's blessing. And God, out of His mercy and grace, would bless America, and God would meet the needs of America. But the key was trusting in God first. So, for example, if the Founding Fathers found out that the heat was unbearable and their crops were burning up, or it was freezing out, they didn't run out. There's nothing wrong with technology, but they didn't run out and attempt to use technology or manpower or willpower to solve the problem, although those things are beneficial. They called a fast and prayer to the Lord because they recognized that God was their source. They confessed their sins before God. They sought the face of God. God opened up the heavens supernaturally and poured out a blessing that there wasn't room enough to receive. And God blessed the Founding Fathers. And despite natural circumstances, we had economic prosperity. Why? Because we chose to trust in the Lord. Key concept. So